Welcome back. Pleasure to be here with all of you. And it seems like most people are indeed back, which is always an honor. If everyone left after the first session, that would be a bit tragic, but not unexpected. Whereas people staying to continue practicing and communicating with each other is always a huge source of joy, which is right on theme because our next immeasurable attitude is that of empathetic joy. To be fair, in the Tibetan terminology, it's just referred to as joy, gawa. There's no empathetic in it. But the word empathetic, or sometimes sympathetic, and there are other translations as well, is added to explain that this is a very specific type of joy that we are activating here. Because Buddhism in general teaches us at least about 7 or 8 or 9, potentially more types of joy that could be accessed through practice. Some of them have to do with the bliss of concentration. Some of them have to do with the joy of having a clear conscience because we have cultivated ethical intelligence to a strong degree. Some stem from the more advanced practices that have to do with using our subtle nervous system. There are many different kinds, as you can eventually explore. And I think somewhere in our empathetic joy materials, in one of those talks, there's a kind of an overview of all of those. But this specific type of joy that we're dealing here is an extension of tenderness once again. So it's kindness expressed through our ability to feel good about the happiness of others. Technically speaking, in the different branches of the Sanskrit textual tradition and in the Pali tradition, there are different interpretations of empathetic joy. So for loving kindness and for compassion, it's pretty consistent. Loving kindness is described in a very consistent way throughout these textual sources with some minor changes here and there. The same for compassion, but with empathetic joy and equanimity, the last of the measurables, there's really a lot of different ways of cultivating them and different elements that can be added to the practice or removed from the practice. So that just means we have more to work with here. It's not going to be boring. And in general, empathetic joy is not meant to be boring. It's a practice in which we go into a joyful state and then we just bliss out, basically. For that reason, in some of the foundational texts on the four immeasurables in the Tibetan textual tradition, it said that empathetic joy is really great for concentration because it's an exciting practice for attentional development. Watching the breath, well, it's boring. Some other types of concentration are also pretty neutral because you're focusing on something that's not very exciting. And here you're supposed to bliss out. And the more you bliss out, the more concentrated you become. So you would think that lots of people would be into that and lots of people would be using this as a concentration practice and also to actually get that empathetic joy as a quality. But I think one reason for why empathetic joy is the least popular of the four immeasurables, that seems to be the case culturally across all the countries, all the traditions. Few people practice this as their main method of concentration or as their main practice in general. I think one reason for why it falls into disuse is that from an evolutionary point of view, we're just more oriented. We're more likely to look for potential challenges and dangers. We need to know the bad news to prepare ourselves for the worst, to know how to deal with all the issues that are coming up for humanity and for our local communities and so forth. And then if we have some attentional span left, then we can attend to the good stuff and feel good about it. And that's what empathetic joy essentially is. But this, while understandable from an evolutionary point of view, seems to have caused strong cultural bias, or maybe even a psychological bias, in that many of us, including myself, are kind of, in terms of our original propensities, less likely to notice the good stuff and to celebrate it. And I think that's even very clearly visible in queer media and in queer-centric plots whether in fiction or in visual media, where we're kind of almost expecting a movie or a series or a book or whatever it is to be about the bad experiences of being queer, the suffering that you have to go through and the discrimination. It's almost like a given. And when something that is positivity affirming, like the queer plot lines of Schitt's Creek, for example, emerges, we're kind of surprised by that. It was like, oh, we could just describe our existence as something positive and not make it a big tragic drama without ignoring the negative, but just also, can we have something nice, please? That almost comes as a surprise. And the same thing here in these meditations. People really sometimes struggle to integrate empathetic joy into their regular practice, or even to occasionally revisit it, because yes, compassion is very necessary, and we kind of get so deeply stuck on it that we don't make time for also celebrating the good things. So in these practices that we're about to do, we'll play with different facets of empathetic joy, starting with the most foundational one that's described in the Pali sources, including the kind of seminal commentaries on the Four Immeasurables that were written by Buddhaghosa and Upatissa. So let's start with that by finding a comfortable stationary position and stretching if we need to. And then we'll just explore empathetic joy through practice. So from a technical point of view, empathetic joy arises when we, with tenderness, attend to someone, including ourselves, being happy, to the fact that we do have these sparks and flames of joy, hedonic and eudaimonic, in our experience. And then when we allow ourselves to feel great about that, that's where empathetic joy starts. So let's first find a comfortable stationary position and spend some time with the body, once again, settling down if our energy feels a bit unsettled after all the conversations and experiences we might have had over the lunch break. With an attitude of tenderness towards our body and towards our mind, performing the preliminary relaxation exercise by revisiting with awareness and with care some of our main body parts, starting with our feet and toes. Releasing the tension from our legs in general, and then our pelvic floor. And then the space of our torso. Our shoulders. Upper arms, forearms. And then our hands and fingers. For a little while, allowing ourselves to just enjoy the process of natural breathing and the tactile waves that accompany this process. The waves that help us soothe our body, soothe our mind, and release everything that's standing in the way of a deeply relaxed and settled state that is yet imbued with clarity. And then noticing how, in enjoying the process of breathing, we can also be offering tenderness to our body and mind, as if holding ourselves in a very gentle, very delicate embrace, and appreciating both our vulnerability and our amazing potential. And with all of that as a foundation, to perform the most traditional version of the empathetic joy practice, we would first need to think of a truly joyful person in our life. Someone who is naturally very sunny in terms of their disposition, jovial, optimistic, lighthearted, probably endowed with a lot of eudaimonic or inner well-being, but also capable of celebrating the small hedonic joys as well. And this is where some people would think of someone from the circle of their loved ones. Some people would think of a teacher figure or someone who just inspires them with their optimism and joyfulness. And if visual imagination is available to us, we can actually imagine this person in the space in front, sitting there and just being their joyful self. Maybe like everyone else, they do on occasion get sad and maybe even extremely sad, but their general predisposition is towards joy. And so that sadness never breaks them. And so, in thinking of such a person and maybe even imagining them, we are attending to that quality of joy within them. We're thinking of all the inner joys that they experience through simply possessing positive or healthy mental habits. And we think of all the hedonic, good-natured hedonic joys that they, on occasion, are able to celebrate. All the cups of tea and coffee, all the sunny, pleasant days, all the nice walks, all the nice conversations that they might be enjoying. And because we are tending to their joys and their joyful disposition, our tenderness towards them can transform into empathetic joy that basically feels and says how wonderful, how amazing. In looking at their happiness, we allow our tenderness to become a sense of delight. A sense of celebration. And then, while holding our awareness on their joys, while attending to these joys with a sense of delight, we can once again use the breath as an ally if we wish, strengthening the delight and that feeling of how wonderful with each new exhalation, for example. And just thinking of someone who's good natured and happy, we can already feel some delight and strengthen it step by step. And then the next step is to turn our awareness back towards ourselves, where in looking at our own experiences and our own life in general, we can recognize the presence of multiple types of joy, multiple pleasant experiences. We have all sorts of hedonic pleasures or pleasant hedonic experiences, starting from the fact that we are somewhat comfortable right now. And this is where we can think of all the pleasant experiences that we might have had today in terms of outer or hedonic stimulation. And then we have the deeper inner types of joy, the joy of inspiration, the joy of creativity, the joy of generosity, the joy of love, compassion, and so forth. And in attending to all these types of joy, all the types of joy that are good-natured and are not connected with harming anyone actively, we can just feel that sense of delight once again. How wonderful. How wonderful that I have access to all these types of joy. Strengthening this sense of delight with each out breath if we wish, or just resting with it and coming back to the thought of how wonderful if that's necessary. And if we want, we can also add an element that's used by the Sanskrit tradition of practice, and that's an aspiration, an additional wish. And although these wishes are sometimes expressed in other ways, here we can, for example, use a very simple wish of, may this joy grow. So we're delighting in our own joy, and with a corner of our mind, we're wishing for this joy to keep growing, becoming more transformative, more vast, more profound, more sustainable. And then just for a little while, we can open it up for other beings, thinking of their joys as well. Those practicing with us and everyone else have access to many different sparks and flames of joy. How wonderful. May all of this joy grow. We'll rest with it for just one more minute, strengthening our delight and, if we wish, also strengthening this additional aspiration. May the joy grow. then releasing both the delight and the wish to just rest in a state of openness. And then coming back to our body to ground ourselves in the sensations. Then slowly introducing a tiny bit of movement by rocking back and forth, moving our fingers, opening our eyes. And then slowly concluding the practice. Thank you. So one more opportunity to just move around a little bit. But also, just a chance to mention how this is really an incredibly helpful skill for multiple reasons. Often in, once again, these more traditional teachings, it is described, well, first of all, as a necessary, indispensable component of the four immeasurables. So if we want to assemble this entire Pokemon team that is the four immeasurables, we do need empathetic joy. So that's already a good reason to practice it. But why it is included in the four immeasurables is that, well, that's our most kind-hearted response to seeing someone who's happy. So the most kind-hearted response to seeing someone suffer is compassion. The most kind-hearted response when someone is kind of just trotting along, in a neutral state, neither too happy nor too sad. The best response to that is loving kindness. And finally, for moments of happiness, our own or that of others, if that happiness is, once again, good nature, so they're not being joyful about some violence or some act of tricking someone else that they've been able to perform. So not that, but if it's just someone enjoying a nice cup of coffee or a nice conversation with friends or a nice walk, or the bliss of their eudaimonic well-being that they've cultivated through practicing, we look at that and we feel empathetic joy, and that's a wonderful response. It's also suggested as a practice, as I've mentioned, because it is really a helpful technique for cultivating concentration, even though in this day and age, very few people use it as their main concentration practice. Another reason that it's recommended is because it's a wonderful antidote for envy and jealousy, or the antidote, in terms of these two states being diametrically opposed. If we have empathetic joy, we can't in that same moment of mental activity be envious of a person. Even though we still kind of struggle with expressing that through language sometimes, because we're not, at least not in the languages that I'm familiar with, not in the European languages, I mean, we're not really saying, when someone says, oh, I'm going on vacation, we don't generally say, oh, so much empathetic joy to you. That kind of feels very clunky, We usually say, oh, I envy you so much. But sometimes if we have practiced these things, or if we're just naturally eudaimonically gifted, we don't actually envy the person, we feel empathetic joy for them. So it would be interesting to see if, under the influence of all these mindfulness based modalities, compassion-based modalities, and so forth, if even our language would slowly shift towards something that is more empathetic joy related in nature. So overcoming envy, working on that, that's another thing. And then one more reason that's kind of, well, I always mention it just because I think it's a fun thing to mention, is that once again, in these traditional Tibetan teachings, empathetic joy is also described as one of the best ways to create a positive karmic causality for yourself that would make you also experience all these other outer types of abundance, wealth, and so forth. So kind of one of the Tibetan Buddhist approaches to manifesting abundance, if you're into manifesting abundance, is to practice empathetic joy. And there's, of course, a deep explanation for how all of that works, which is not relevant for those who are practicing this from a more secular point of view, but still fun to mention. If you want to manifest some wealth, just practice lots of empathetic joy and see if it affects your interdependence or not. It's an experiment. So another thing that I think we mentioned in our retreat last year was that there are some traditions in Tibetan Buddhism which describe this practice from a different point of view, in that in those traditions, that's especially the tradition of the old translation school or Nyingma tradition, which makes a lot of emphasis, puts a great emphasis on our Buddha nature and uncovering it. In those traditions, according to His Holiness the Dalai Lama in the sources that he's relying on, we actually can practice empathetic joy by just thinking of the fact that we have this amazing, beautiful, spacious, luminous nature. And that nature, when it is experienced, is bliss. So by even thinking of, oh, there's this bliss deep within me, we can actually start feeling that bliss. And then just expanding that is a way of practicing empathetic joy. So it's kind of a very interesting way of practicing it, which I think sometimes that's the joke I made last year. So it's not really a joke. Sometimes when you talk to people and you say, well, this tradition describes our true nature as luminous, spacious bliss, amongst all the different people that you could talk about this stuff to, queer people would struggle the least with this wording. It's like, oh, your nature is a beautiful, spacious rainbow that is also blissful in nature. And queer people would say, well, duh, of course it is. Whereas outside of that might be a bit of a weird concept, that you have this kind of rainbow-like quality deep within you. And at the same time, of course, there are things that are reversed, in that people who have struggled with oppression and things of that nature, or have really not been very welcomed by society, maybe even by their loved ones, would find it difficult to access tenderness, actually. So we win some, we lose some. That being said, the practice that we will do is not that one, not the one that has to do with our luminous, blissful nature, because even though some notes of that are present in the Gaelic tradition, it's not very strongly emphasized, so that would be a bit out of style for something that we're doing in a Gaelic center. Instead, we'll focus on a quality that is often used as an additional element for empathetic joy practices. And that's a quality that has its own name. In English, it's rejoicing. In the original languages of Buddhism, Pali and Sanskrit, that's referred to as anumodana, whereas empathetic joy is mudita. So it's the same root, but the words are different. And these qualities are also different, because with empathetic joy, we focus on the pleasant experiences that we ourselves have and that others have, and then we feel delight about that, and we celebrate that, and we can even add this final wish of may it grow, or may I not be separated from that. That's the more traditional wording. Whereas with rejoicing, we once again have this sense of delight, but it's focused on our own positive qualities and actions, and on the positive qualities and actions of others. So empathetic joy celebrates the result, the happiness that ripens as a result of positive causality. Whereas rejoicing celebrates the cause, the positive causes we create every time we do something that is wholesome. And here positive just means something that can contribute to happiness. So it's kind of one of those very simple definitions. If it leads to happiness for ourselves and others, it's defined as wholesome, positive, realistic. If it leads to suffering, well, obviously, nothing good about that. So here we focus on the presence of such qualities as generosity and love and compassion and mental discipline and so forth in our own mind, in the minds of others. And then we focus on all the actions that express those qualities. And for each action, no matter how tiny, we can spend some moments with it, really thinking, oh, how wonderful, how amazing, really kind of celebrating that. And it's said that such a practice would strengthen all these positive propensities within us, even if the action that we are rejoicing in was not done by us originally, it's someone else's generosity. Oh, so many people came together to make this retreat happen. How amazing, they've invested all this work into it. And I'm seeing that all around me, there are all these wonderful practitioners who are really focusing on practice. How amazing. So for each thing that we celebrate like that, some positive propensity in our mind is strengthened. And sometimes when empathetic joy and rejoicing are taught, they're described in one meditation or are practiced within one meditation together. And sometimes they're teased apart because originally they actually came from slightly different cycles of Buddhist teachings. It's just now we put them together for simplicity. So let's play with that a little bit and see how that feels. Usually it feels great, but maybe we're sleepy and we'll just doze off. That's fine, as long as we're not snoring too loudly. And yet this practice is actually one of the easiest ways to pick ourselves up. And so some teachers, including the other founder of Jamyang, Lama Thupten Yeshe, used to say that it's the one thing we should do when we come home from work and when we just lie down on a couch, no energy left in our body because we're working hard. The simplest thing to do there and the most meaningful thing to do, one of the most meaningful things to do, is to practice rejoicing. So finding a comfortable stationary position first, and then spending some time with our body to soothe and relax all of the systems within it. Releasing all the tension from the lower half of our body with each new exhalation. And then the same for the upper half. Everything in our torso, everything in our face, softening all the muscles to the degree that's available to us right now, and just resting. For a little while, offering some tender attention to ourselves and maybe by extension to all beings. And then for a little while turning to the practice of rejoicing, in which we will allow our mind to find beautiful qualities and beautiful actions performed by us, performed by others. And then we will celebrate those by actively thinking, how wonderful, how amazing. So we can start by thinking of some admirable actions that were done by others. Maybe we've witnessed something meaningful today, or yesterday, or over the preceding weeks. As soon as our mind catches a specific action, a specific act of generosity, or a specific system of actions, maybe, we can think of that and celebrate it by generating the thought and the attitude of how wonderful, how amazing. And this is where we can use the method of free associations. Once we have rejoiced in one action or one quality, after a few cycles of breathing, we can allow our mind to go to the next object, to another quality or action that we can also celebrate. And for now, we'll keep celebrating the positive actions, the acts of kindness, and the qualities of heart and mind that have to do with other people, that belong to other people, or seemingly belong. We can go as far into the past as we feel inspired to. We can go back to the kindness of our parents. We can go back to the kindness of our ancestors or the Buddha or other great beings. All of that can be a suitable object of rejoicing. And then, and this is where some of us might feel some novelty in this, then we can turn our gaze towards our own positive actions and qualities. But here we think of ourselves as a system. So there is no risk of us becoming too self-centered or self-focused, celebrating ourselves excessively. No, we're just thinking of all the positive threads within this complex interbraiding of elements that we call ourselves. And so all the beautiful qualities and expressions of them can be celebrated through the same thought of how wonderful, how amazing. So now for a little while we'll focus on our own positive qualities, drifting from one to another as we see fit. Celebrating our actions, our patterns of behavior, and our qualities that lie at the root of those. And then for a tiny bit, we can open it up to all beings with all of their positive qualities and behavioral patterns and actions, celebrating in everything, rejoicing in everything that deserves rejoicing, celebrating everything that deserves to be celebrated. All with that boundless attitude of how wonderful, how amazing. Then releasing the thought of how amazing, releasing the objects of that thought, and for a little while just resting in the afterglow, seeing how our mind feels after a period of rejoicing. And then coming back to our body to just ground ourselves there. Introducing a tiny bit of movement and very slowly concluding this practice. Thank you. So, just throwing in some ideas and planting some seeds here and there. Hopefully, even if not now, eventually all of us can explore these different types of joy and many other types of joy that are explained in Buddhism. They're all interconnected. They all form a coherent system, actually, but we need to start somewhere. So empathetic joy is as good a place as any. But in the meantime, we can enjoy the delightful break. And so we have 15 more minutes to just hang out and drink tea, I guess, and dance around. And then in 15 minutes, we'll reconvene for our last meditation session, in which we'll focus on equanimity, and then we'll kind of do an interactive, but very simple group thing to conclude the day. So thank you very much. Enjoy your break, and see you all in 15 minutes. Thank you.